William Liu, I'm a member of TFCC, but I'm here today also as a CCIS advisor. My second question to you, sir, is I believe many of my media friends are going to agree with me on this. You just gave yourself, this presentation, the soundbite. She has been taking Mao for tools to reach Deng's aims. Can you elaborate a little bit further on that? Because I think well, lately we have been hearing a lot of different stories coming up from Zhongnanhai, and we also know that the incumbent here has openly expressed, well, if things work out, Mao would like to meet up with Xi. So with that in the background, can you please share with us your observations regarding that soundbite? Xi has been taking Mao for tools to reach Deng's aims for future reforms. Thank you.
Yeah, any reporters in the room that weren't using that soundbite, you now have to. Well, don't we have the 120th birthday of Mao?
Yes.
Is it today or is it yesterday? It's what? Yesterday. Oh, 差不多. That's a glib soundbite, but I think the reality is he is using the only tools the party has. If you want to crack down in China, what do? You have to use the only tools the party has. It's not like he can go use rule of law and judges and all of this, because the system, it does not work that way yet. And maybe it will someday, but it certainly doesn't. And remember, there's still a lot of people that, when you have this many vested interests, why did you have, 101 countries that reached the middle income trap, and then only 13 made it past in 30, 40 years? Because the vested interests that don't want change, once you're making that money, and then you'll be exposed if the system changes. So there's a lot of resistance to change. So what do? You have to, then you don't do it by being nice. You do it by scaring the hell out of people. And so the party he is out scaring people, and he's saying, who's the boss? Remember who the boss is. Whether you are a big blogger, or whether you are the former security chief, or whether you are a vice governor of a province or whatever, you better listen to us. And it's not like you can't go after all corruption, because that would be a big list. But what you do is I think what you have to do is you got to kind of say, okay, you made your money, go away. You made your money, enjoy it, step back. From here on out, we're going to try to move it forward, and don't get in our way. Because the party, the party constantly, who and when said this, that the party can't survive if corruption isn't cleaned up. And again, let's look at the KMT. And I was here at the end of the KMT reign, and it was, the Lao Tse. Well, why were the Lao Tse still in office? Because their children were able to clean up money from the system. You talk about state-owned enterprise. When I was here, I did a story about KMT Inc. In KMT Inc., you had the insurance companies, and I forget, but it was a whole long list of things that were connected to the party. Well, that was, I think, cleaned up pretty well. So, I think these things can happen.
Gregor, thanks for such a brilliant presentation. This is Jane Rickards with The Economist, and also with AmCham's Taiwan Business Topics magazine. I've got a question specifically about the Shanghai experimental free trade zone, which sort of goes into a more broader question about the reforms. I've been told that it might be difficult for China to do sort of experiments in financial liberalisation because they intend to sort of crack down on the internet, which makes it difficult if you're going to have sort of real-time sort of exchange of information if they're internet crackdowns. And I thought this could possibly be one area where the party's intention to sort of show who's boss and have very sort of strong political controls might actually conflict with their proposals for reform. Do you think there'll be much conflict between their desire to sort of keep control and, to institute the reforms you talked about? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I mean, in China, one of the things that has really been almost completely open is economic debate. To debate economics and do you do this, do you do that, has been quite open. So getting financial information from the outside also, they just don't want stories about leadership families. What the price of cotton is or who's trading what is not. I ran Dow Jones in 96. We got an order in January saying that the Xinhua news agency would control all financial information coming into China. And we spent 2 years fighting that. And we were able to win because we were able to show that that would have been a disaster for China because their traders needed the same information as traders around the world. And if you're going to run that through Xinhua, good luck. And we were able to push it back. So I think there's a clear room for economic news and economic numbers. Politics is what they worry about. But where do you divide that? I don't know. The internet has always been controlled. I got here last night and I opened up my computer and I started turning on my VPN so I could actually see something. And I thought, wait, I don't need a VPN. And I was able to get a lot of things. So I think they'll still get the financial information. If they had kicked Bloomberg out, if Bloomberg got kicked out of there at the end of the month, I think that would have been a real signal to the markets, and that would have had profound consequences. But instead, I think they're just giving visas out, and they've told the reporters, here's the line, do not report on leadership families.
The German Institute in Taipei. I would like to know, after you outlined the kind of, let's say, China way things or ways of thinking that exist in China, obviously in the leadership, how much conflict is there in looking at China into the world and its integration into the world? And how big is the commitment to globalization, to opening policies? Is that something that we can take for granted still under these circumstances? Or is there a possibility that China's becoming more protectionist, closing its force? The media question, internet, actually goes into the same direction. Thank you. German Institute, yeah.
Well, I tell you, I work with many foreign companies now in the consulting firm. I have APCO, it's not my consulting firm, it's out of Washington. And we see it's harder and harder for foreign companies. There's more and more barriers, there's more and more protectionism through more subterranean means than above ground rules. It's been tougher and tougher and tougher for foreign companies in China. And a lot of them they're fairly disillusioned. But they need the China market for growth. They know there's 800 million more people to meet the middle class. And China's very good at giving important companies enough market share that they go along, but blocking from getting too much. And we'll see where this administration, we're going to see where this is all going to go. But it's much tougher for foreign companies, but China now also is investing around the world, and they want their companies to be able to play around the world. So I think that will probably be the governing factor. As companies get more international, it's going to be harder and harder because there's going to be a lot of pressures for fair treatment on both sides. Now that may not happen next year, but in upcoming years it'll probably work out a bit that way.
Excellent speech. Great book.
He's my publicity agent.
Right. That's a full disclosure, transparency. The book focuses a lot on the authoritarian capitalism, what's going on domestically, the impact and the role of the state sector historically and how it's in kind of AmCham type terms. Not a level playing field. You also touch on how that entire structure and way of life, economic life and political life, impacts or does not conform or comply with WTO, and how China treats the world trade system as it used to intimidate, cajole, convince, reward, and penalize in a JV situation. Can you talk a little bit about what you see going on in the WTO, the bilateral relationship so-and-so president receives the Dalai Lama, many of them. Some are afraid, I don't know who that might be. And then, over the years, the relationship changes. They go to Beijing, they become a supplicant, my word, not yours. How does that play out, either on a bilateral evolutionary scale or as a WTO system? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. I'm not going to touch the Dalai Lama part. I need a visa too. The WTO, it would be too strong to say that the WTO is useless, but it's fairly broken. I mean, I really studied this, and if you look at GATT, the precursor to the WTO, it really was a number of countries leading it, America and Europe and some others, who really, because of the Cold War, they were sometimes fairly magnanimous with their trade rules because they wanted to have friends around the world. And the U.S. was so strong in trade after World War II that the U.S. could afford to be that way. But it was led by a few countries, maybe a dozen, who could make the rules. Then you change to the WTO, and it's 148 countries or something like that. They all have to agree on everything. Everything they all have to agree on, 148 countries. 148 countries couldn't agree on the time to have dinner together. And so this Doha round, the so-called Doha round. I mean, the Doha round is basically aiming at how do you reform the world trade system to go beyond products crossing borders and duties. Because that's yesterday's trade. Global supply chains, parts are coming from everywhere. They're going part manufactured here, part manufactured there. That's yesterday's stuff. Now it's about cross-border investment. It's about intellectual property. It's about many other things. So the Doha round is aimed at taking the world trade rules and modernizing them. And Doha round has gone nowhere. And at Doha, when that round was formed, something else happened. China joined the WTO. So China is very, very, very smart at dealing with the WTO because, think about China. The rules in China sometimes, often don't make sense. And if you have a rule in China that doesn't make sense, you don't eliminate it, you just go around it. And so China's now, its core competency of going around rules is being applied internationally. Do not take it personally. This is just a core competency that is going outward. And so China's very smart in figuring out where the holes are in WTO and driving through them with a truck. And so China is not responsible for the WTO being dysfunctional, but it has been a beneficiary of the WTO being dysfunctional. However, China needs the WTO and China needs an orderly global trading system because it is one of the world's biggest traders and it's a big part of its economy. And where global trade is going now, it's like they call it a tangled spaghetti bowl of trade. Everybody's got, bilateral, multilateral, there's just all these different agreements, TPP, TPPP, IPP, and all of this everywhere. And so there's no core central system, and we're really getting away from it. I don't have an answer to that, but the WTO just 2 weeks ago had this great fanfare that they had actually accomplished something, and it was really, really a tiny thing, but they actually all agreed to something in the end. So I don't have the answer, but China depends on the WTO ordering world trade as much as anybody else. So I don't know where that's going to go in the future, but they've been masterful at working it so far.
Hi, James. Michael Cole. I guess I'm freelancing and with Diplomat, and we're fellow CPOL members. I'm in Taiwan, but I'm from Quebec City, Canada, if you're very curious. You talk about the need for Taiwan to, you mentioned, for example, 3D printing technology, or for Taiwan, the need for Taiwan to take the lead again in terms of technology and all that. Given its current rapprochement with China and the growing interdependency, if you will, do you think it's even still possible for Taiwan to do that? Or would such technology be taken up by China the very next week, for example?
Well, I wouldn't worry about China taking up Taiwan's technology the very next week. I'd worry about China getting way ahead of. I mean, if you think that there are not 10 institutes in Taiwan, in mainland China right now, who are studying every angle of 3D printing, manufacturing, and figuring out who owns what technology, what do we do ourselves, how do we get it going, China's going to be all over this. And it's going to be disruptive for China because it's going to take away a lot of manufacturing you do offshore and shipping it back and forth and all of that, because you'll be manufacturing close to home. And it's not going to kill manufacturing, but it's going to profoundly change it. So China will be all over this. The problem is China can't innovate. I mean, China can innovate the internet companies in China can innovate because they take models from elsewhere and make them much better. I mean, Weixin, WeChat is excellent. My kids and I have a WeChat circle that they can't get away from me. They got to talk to me on a regular basis. But China's indigenous innovation, all the money put into innovation, really has gone nowhere because it came from the center, and it was a game of central government money, bureaucrats picking who got the money instead of a peer-based bubble-up system. And the education system in China doesn't lead towards innovation. China's really working at this, trying to figure it out. Taiwan has that. Taiwan has a free market democracy. They have an open media. You've got good universities, and you've got people that study all over the world. You've got huge advantage for a period of time. But if you sit back and enjoy life, China will get way ahead on that. But I think Taiwan has a real good chance. I haven't done deep study of this, but from what I've seen of Taiwan in the past and what I've seen where things are coming, I've got great confidence in Taiwan.
Chou Zhaoling from Academic Sinica. Can you comment on the future prospect of state-owned enterprise reform of China? Is there any plan? And the consequences if there's no action taken?
Yeah, from what we've seen so far of the wording of the third plenum and some of that is that they want to make state-owned enterprise competitive. So I think they're going to try to have more market forces force them to get better, but I don't know how you really do that without unleashing a lot of, well, here's one example. Look at what they're allowing on the internet with Alibaba and all these other entities, Tencent, who are now running very big loan portfolios. And it's P2P loans, people-to-people loans, and it's the money you put into your Alibaba Alipay account is like a money market. So they're allowing a lot of this stuff to force their banks to get better. But unless they do some real movement, I don't know. And there's also a Maoduan, because at the same time they're saying they want the big state enterprise to get more efficient. They're also saying that they want them to give, I think, 30% of their profits to the government by 2020 so that it can fund the Social Security and the other social benefits. Well, if you want them to have big profits and fund social benefits, do you really want them to have competition? Because you'd rather have them have monopolies. So it's really unclear, but they do know that in many cases they're really hurting the economy. That's come out in many government people talking or in studies.
Mr. McGregor, this is Elsie Tsai from Thinking Time Foundation. I've got two questions. First, according to some reports, the overproduction of goods in China is becoming a growing problem, impacting the global supply chain, resources, and the financial industry. How should China's leaders attempt to solve this problem? And the second, the third plenum made a number of promises on the economic front. What do you feel are the conditions of success to carry out the reforms, and what difficulties might Xi Jinping face? Thank you very much.
Well, first on the production, China's a producer-based economy. because it comes out of state planning and the whole Soviet system. So everything was based on the producer, not the consumer, whereas if you look at the US, it's all about the consumer. And so that has to flip, because even now a lot of local governments will allow overproduction from state factories because they can tax them based on production, not on profits. And the overcapacity, I mean, China's that way. If somebody starts making refrigerators and making money, then there's going to be 10,000 refrigerator factories within a year. And it's just the way China works. Then they have to consolidate it and crack down and clean it up. But those cycles go on and on. But the overproduction of steel and other things, one thing we have not addressed, and I think this will go some way towards cleaning this up, is pollution. A lot of these overproducing steel factories and other heavy industry are really high polluters, and it is a survival issue for the party to clean up pollution. I live in Beijing. Beijing, it's lost its charm in many ways. It's been polluted the whole time we've been there, but now it's exponentially worse. We have blue sky hours, not blue sky days. I mean, you can get up in the morning and you'll have blue sky, and if there's no wind by noon, you can hardly see the building next door if there's no wind. It's just, that is life. And so they have to clean that up. So I think that will lead towards, I think, some of this overproduction being closed down. But it's also a business opportunity. Once China sees this as a business opportunity, which they do, on going green and putting your money into the green technology instead of the old, let's save jobs technology. And remember, we have a labor shortage happening, so it's not going to be so much as saving jobs, because they don't have the factory worker, that huge mass of people anymore. So this could all evolve. If you talked about Xi Jinping and the problems he faces, oh my God, I mean, that poor guy's got the toughest job on earth. Obama's job is a picnic in comparison. But when it comes to state-owned enterprise, I mean, one of the things that happened, I'm talking about these big central SOEs. There's 113 of them, as I said earlier. What happened is, once they corporatized them and put their shares into SASAC, they were moved away from their ministries. So they're fairly independent, especially because this Godzaway, the SASAC, does not have a lot of power. So where's the power? It's the party, because the party appoints the leaders of these big central SOEs. So in some ways, they're almost like the military in that they report to the party, not the government. Not officially, but if you're from the organization department of the party and they appoint you to be, one day you're head of China Mobile, the next, a year later you're head of, the secretary of Gansu province, you're part of the system. So this can go two ways. If Xi has a big grip on the party, he can make these big SOEs reform, because they're all part of the system, and because the party appoints him, the organization department does, he can have a very strong grip. And if you see what's going on there, it appears that Mr. Xi has a very strong grip. The other hand, if these big SOE guys are really powerful, they're powerful enough to get in the way of reform. I have to say, if you're going after some of the tigers they're going after right now for corruption, the oil companies, I think there's been like 18 or 20 vice minister level or above people arrested for corruption in the last year, 18 months. I think people will listen to the center when they want something done. So I'm optimistic they're going to be able to clean up some of these SOEs, but there is great resistance, of course. But I was at a banquet about a year ago, and around the table were a bunch of SOE bosses, not the CEOs, but fairly senior guys. And so I started asking them about things, and they all basically said, we suck. I mean, they said, we've got all these profits, we're a big company, but we're inefficient. We're inefficient, we've got to, they were unhappy. These are the guys that are, in the executive ranks of the SOEs. These people want, I mean, if you're head of one of the big banks in China, and you are head of one of the biggest banks in the world, and you are going and you're meeting other bankers around the world, do you think you're thinking, boy, am I cool? No, you're thinking, God, I've got this big bank and it doesn't work. And and it's inefficient, and the only reason I'm here is because we're big. And these are people with pride, and they're very capable people. So I think inside the SOEs, there's a lot of people that want these to become much better companies. And in fact, some of them are pretty darn good companies.
I'm Liu Yufeng from Zhanghua University of Education. As we know, China has established Shanghai Free Trade Zone, and the other free trade zone plan, like Tianjin, Qingdao, Xiamen, Gangao, are on the way also. My first question is, how do you evaluate China's project of free trade zone? And the second question is, how do you think, what will be the impact of the free trade zones on the economic relations across the strait and on the Taiwan's economies?
Thank you. I mean, if you look, I think if you know, let's look back at Wen Jiabao. Wen Jiabao, for a good part of his administration, talked about reform. He talked about economic reform. He talked about political reform too, but the reforms that I talked about earlier, the 36 clauses that came out and that he put in 2005, the system has stopped reform. The bureaucrats are very powerful. And so how do you break that grip? Well, you start a special economic zone. So I think these free trade zones are aspirational. They're pockets where you gotta talk about it now. Everybody talks about the Shanghai Free Trade Zone. I'm a consultant. All my companies. What about the free trade zone? What are we going to do? Should we register there? What's the free trade zone? It's like nobody knows what the hell it is. I mean, they want to use it for reform, and they want to get away with what they can in there. And so there was all these ideas what they would do, and then they were knocked back, and now they're moving forward again. And it basically, I think, is just a place that causes people to talk reform and to move it ahead, and it can isolate reform a little bit, and they can do things outside of with the other parts of the government not stopping them. I mean, so once, as happens in China, once Shanghai said they were going to do a free trade zone, Shenzhen had already done what called Qianhai. Then all these other major cities say, if he can have a free trade zone, why can't I have a free trade zone? I want a free trade zone. Well, how about if I have 2 free trade zones? And so now it's all talking about reform. All these cities are talking about reform. Think about that. That wasn't happening before the Shanghai Free Trade Zone. So there's a competition, because take away the word free trade zone, there's a competition among cities now talking about reform. How do we reform? How do we open our economy? How does our financial system work better? And that is, maybe it's like Mao, going to the countryside to take the cities. Maybe you go out and you do these free trade zones and you talk about reform, and that comes back and knocks the bureaucrats in Beijing back. This is going to be very interesting to watch. I think it's more of a system thing than you can watching every fact as they come along. For Taiwan, I don't know what it means other than watch them very closely, and if you see an opening, go grab an opportunity.
This is Ho Chen from Xiaoyin Education Foundation. I would like to pick up the earlier question about the leadership in China. As far as I understood you correctly, you seem very optimistic about reform in China. The reason was you said China knows the figure from the top. This is a very high regard to any government leader. I wonder how do you so sure about the observation in China on that regard? Thank you.
Well, I've been in China since 1990, and as a reporter I traveled around and talked to officials. Through my consulting I do, American Chamber of Commerce has given me a lot of access, and if you sit down and you talk to officials in China, whether they're the mayor, party secretary of a province, a minister, and they realize you kind of know what you're doing and they don't have to give you a bunch of nonsense, they're very clued in. I mean, they're great students. They study their numbers, and it's a system really that in some ways, the party's a bit of a secret society in some of its politics, but in its functioning, it's somewhat like General Electric. it recruits smart people, it trains them, it moves them to jobs of ever-increasing responsibility. So the quality of the people you meet is pretty incredible, and they know their numbers. I mean, it's a real disadvantage for, when you're doing trade negotiations with China. Because America, we have a big turnover. So, they're going into MOFCOM or whatever, and they're negotiating something. The guy on the American side of the table is a former insurance salesman from Toledo who was, a big fundraiser for the president. And then he becomes a deputy secretary of commerce. And he's got two 25-year-olds next to him who just are just out of Wharton. And so they've read their brief on the plane on the way over. And on the other side of the table is the Chinese negotiator who's done this for 20 years. And they're just, kind of chuckling. So they do, there is some advantage in this very professional bureaucratic system that China has. It goes back a couple thousand years. So they know their numbers. They very much know their numbers, and I think they know they live and die by the numbers. Because, China's very good at propaganda, but they don't often believe their own propaganda. They know what they need to do. And the numbers don't lie. If China does not do economic and financial reform, the economy can't keep growing. If the economy can't keep growing, you can't have political stability. It's a very simple formula. And if you're at a banquet or you meet with any official in China and they trust you, they will. That's kind of what they'll say in so many words.
Hi, my name is Shuren from Commonwealth Magazine. I'm a researcher for the magazine. My question is about another thing that doesn't really make sense in China, which is China's property market. And many economists said China's property market is the most important sector in the universe because it is one of the most important engines for China's economy. So every few years, some people say China's property market is going to collapse. But from year to year, it doesn't really collapse. In some years, it is doing good. In some years, it's not that good. So in the past few months, people again are talking about the collapse of China's property market because especially when they see Hong Kong's Li Ka-shing sold some of his assets in Shanghai and Hong Kong, and there are so many ghost cities across the country. But on the other hand, the housing price in the major cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangdong, and Shenzhen, are still rising to a ridiculous level. So what do you think about the prospect of China's property market? Thank you.
Well, I will answer your question, but let me establish my credibility on this first. You are looking at the biggest real estate idiot in China. When I was a reporter in like 1991, I went up to Shenyang and I went to this compound and I interviewed these workers who had just bought their apartment in an experimental little place and they were so happy. This was the beginning of experimenting with housing. And from then until now, the gazillions of dollars that have been made on real estate in China have not landed in my bank account. I never bought property in China. I mean, Wang Yixun, this wonderful lady that worked with me in Shanghai in about mid-90s, said, Jim, you got to buy an apartment on the Bund. They were building them on the Pudong side. And I said, oh, but I'm a foreigner. I can't get legal registration. She said, no, it'll work out. Don't worry about it. I said, no, can't do it. But I have 2 houses in Minnesota that will go up by 5% before I die. So that's my credibility. Now I'll answer your question. Here's the deal with real estate in China, and very simple, is that it's not a bubble in the sense of America, that it's debt-driven. People actually own their apartments. What the problem is if you're rich in China, what do you do with your money? It's not easy to be rich in China. You can buy how many Bentleys, how many golf course memberships, how many mistresses, how many whatever. And then you got $500 million left. What do you do with it? You buy property and you leave it empty. So if you go, you know, these buildings in China where you've got all they're dark at night, they're all owned by somebody. And so you have to clear that inventory. And Beijing, Shanghai, a couple of the cities are national markets. If you're rich in America, if you're from Toledo and you're rich, you do not buy an apartment in New York or Washington. If you're rich in China, you buy an apartment in Beijing and Shanghai and maybe a couple other places just because you got to have them. So these make them national markets, and so the prices get just skyrocketed. The real key is, and this goes right to the economic reforms, local governments don't have money. They made their money by real estate, you know, because then they had quite an advantage because the factories, China being a producer economy, the factories were in the center of town. So the city governments would sell the property for a pittance, buy it for a pittance, sell it, and then they and the real estate developers made a lot of money. And so that was how the cities funded themselves, was through real estate sales. Another reason why property went so high. And then you have the ring roads to hell phenomenon. Because why does Beijing have 6 ring roads? Do you really want to just drive around Beijing all the time? What happened, and this has been part of the pollution, it's this terrible development model, because turning rural land into urban land is very hard. But if you build a ring road, then the city can declare anything inside that ring road to be urban land. I mean, there's ways to do it, right? And so then the farmers are paid the agriculture value of the land, a pittance, and then the developers and the government make a whole lot of money. So if you do 1 ring road, why not do 6? So you've ended up with this high-polluting ring road model to hell in China, and you know, and then it's the automobile, you know, it's all automobiles. So that also has fueled this whole real estate rise. But meanwhile, you got to clear inventory. So what do you need? You need there's no penalty for holding on to property because there's no annual tax. But Chinese people that own property say, I paid the government so much. They got so much of the money when I bought this thing. Why would I want to give them money every year? But that is what's going to happen, is you're going to have an annual real estate tax because you've got to clear that inventory if you're going to do urbanization. You can't have 1/3 of the apartments in a city empty but owned by somebody. But it's not going to be easy politically because if the mayor has 10 secret apartments, that's not good. But this is all going to have to be cleaned up, and so if there's going to be a real estate price adjustment, I think it'll come as part of that process of the real estate tax and clearing inventory, and that's something they're going to have to do, and it won't be easy.